Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Lancaster. I want to welcome each of you to today's Synergis Express Learning webinar. Our topic for today is Inventor iParts. One of the things when I started setting this up, I realized that there's a lot of great information to be shared regarding Inventor iParts. So what I decided to do is to break it up into two sessions. So today we're going to have, like I said, the introduction. And then Wednesday, either I'm not sure if the meeting invite or the setup yet, but in about 2 weeks we'll have an advanced session on iParts. So what is our agenda for today? Basically we're going to talk about, because it's an introduction, let's talk about the definition, what's possible. There's a couple types of iParts. Basically, we're going to be focusing on creating standard iParts. Pros and cons, like anything, there's always positive things about it and negative things as well. And then we'll switch over to Inventor and walk through some demos of how to be creating iParts, generating the members, using them in your drawings, and so on. And if there's enough time at the end, one of the things that a lot of people struggle with in iParts is members are not updating. So I'm going to walk you through a surefire way of forcing a member update. Like I said, that depending on our time, we may push that off to the advanced class. So let's start out with the definition. And basically, I kind of summarized it in the statement at the end in the red. Basically, an iPart is kind of like a common part that you model, but within that part, you have a spreadsheet-like table that's defining all your controlling factors. So think about in your organization, let's say, for example, you make all different types of mounting plates. Well, mounting plates may have different lengths, widths, number of holes, materials, maybe you paint some, those type of things. You can basically compile that all together in one part file, apply this table-like information, and then generate the members from that. And we're, like I said, we'll demonstrate that later on. So why would you use an iPart? And I just kind of basically pointed that out using the example again in the mounting plate. Well, you could model each one of those configurations. Well, it's much easier, in my opinion. It makes your job easier. Create an iPart with all that information. Then you have a master file and everything is in one location. So let's break it down. The master file that I've been talking about of the iPart is considered the iPart factory. This is the file where all the work is done and all the data is maintained. Now, from that table, you generate members, and there's a couple ways that members get generated. This is basically like you are modeling each one of those configurations, but it's done based on the table. If the member is not already generated, when I go to place that member, a given member in my assembly or drawing, if the member is not generated, it will automatically do that. Or the user has the ability to generate all or the individual members directly from the iPart factory, and we're going to walk through those different steps. So what's possible when you're creating an iPart? Well, you can have automatic member naming, and when we talk about member naming, it's basically, what are you calling that file? You can assign your parameters, your properties, all custom parameters and properties. You can actually designate key columns, which I call, the questions. When somebody's picking a member, what do you want them to pick? So let's say, for example, your mounting plate may always have 4 holes in it, but maybe the length, width, and thickness changes. Well, you could set up those key columns so that when somebody goes to pick it, they're going to say, okay, I want this length, I want this width, and I want this thickness. You can also define different materials and appearances inside that iPart table. Same thing, you can define, threads and thread data. So maybe this one mounting plate has 1/4 20 tap toes, but maybe another one has, you know, 1/2 13 tap toes. If you're working with iMates, you can do that. Any work features that you create, you can include. One of the things that, and I'll show you this later on, work features may be in the iPart factory, but they do not carry over to the members unless you apply those features inside your table. You can also feature suppression. So maybe, like I said, that you have a mounting plate that sometimes has 2 holes, 4 holes, 6 holes. You can set up your iPart factory to have all the holes and then use your table to, you know, suppress those components. Although I'm not going to get into this either in this session or in the advanced, but you can also apply the iFeatures and any table-driven iFeatures that you apply to the factory. Even in depth for sheet metals and Excel formulas, those will be covered more in the advanced class, but you have the ability for each member to assign, you know, certain sheet metal roles, unfold, and those type of things. So as stated in the beginning, there's 2 types in iParts. There's a standard iPart, and then there's a custom iPart. The standard iPart is basically, it's a model that you're going to, you know, develop, you know, a part design, and then you're going to define that table and generate the member information from there. A custom iPart, which we'll cover in the advanced class, is kind of like a standard iPart, but instead of having the defined member information or in its values inside the iPart table, you basically set up a column and say this is a custom value. So when an custom iPart is pulled and placed into a drawing or an assembly, it's going to ask you, so for example, I can set it up so I can do length, width, and thickness. Kind of like what I tell people, think of it like a structural piece of steel where, you know, the length changes. You don't want to set up a standard iPart with all the different cut lengths that you're going to make. I mean, that table would just be huge. So what it allows you to do with a custom iPart is define the basic structural dimensional values and then create a custom length for the cut length, or, you know, the final length that you're going to use. And like I said, we'll talk more about custom iParts in the advanced class. So here's some things that I just wanted to point out. One of the things that I think a lot of people don't have a full understanding of iParts, and when I started breaking down this stuff, there's a lot of information, and that's why I wanted to split it into 2 sessions. And others will just struggle with, because it's just, if you don't know some things ahead of time, you may, you know, years ago I set up a system, I was using iParts. In the end, I didn't really like that. It didn't really help me what I was doing, but so I just wanted to point these things out for you to consider. With a standard iPart, you're always just selecting a member from a list, whether, you know, when you put that into the drawing or assembly. The member location is controlled. However, you're going to learn in the advanced class how you can get around that. It's not, you know, I have this iPart factory in folder A, but I want to put the member in somewhere else. You do have some ability to control that, and like I said, we'll show that in the advanced class, but out of the box, the member location is controlled. 1 member per definition per row in the table. You know, kind of think of it, you know, basically when you look at the iPart table, it looks just like a, you know, Excel spreadsheet. There is a 1,000 row limitation, 256 column limitation. But I tell people, if you're getting into that area, break it up into smaller chunks. You will run into performance issues. Members will get corrupt and those type of things. Even though, like I said, that limitation out there, avoid even getting close to that. And then consider, you know, creating an iPart configuration where you may end up only having 4 rows, but because your columns have custom configuration, that, you know, reduces the number of members in your table. Another thing that people point, like, why can't I edit the individual members? With a standard iPart, you are not allowed to edit the information. It is all controlled by the iPart factory and the table, so just keep that in mind. But when you get into sheet metal aspect, you do have flat pattern feature editing. So you could create a member, generate a member, go into that flat pattern and do some things for that. And like I said, we'll talk more about that in the advanced class. Planning ahead is a key thing with iParts, and I'm going to show you what happens when you don't plan ahead. A lot of people, if you look at some of the Inventor help or other Inventor books that are out there, a lot of people consider iParts to be a library component. You know, you define that library path inside your active project file. Should you or not? That's your choice. However you want to consider, but there is no set thing that says that iPart factories are always library components. But there's a lot of information out there that points to and say, well, you know, you really should, you know, define your iPart factory as a library. Another thing, like I said, what we'll talk more about in the advanced class is you have the ability to define a proxy path inside of your project file to kind of control where your members are going, but we'll talk about that in a couple weeks. Members not updating, like I said, if we have enough time at the end of the class, I'll kind of walk you through a workflow that always works. It's not a user-friendly workflow, but it gets the job done. And I always tell people when they're working with iParts, test them, and I'm going to show you how you do that before you generate the members. I had a case once where I didn't even think about that. I went and generated members, and I was getting failures over that. Well, if I tested it up front, I would have known that certain members couldn't get generated because, you know, dimensions kind of overlapped in the sketch and was causing issues. Like anything, there's always pros and cons. So what's the advantage? Well, it's very easy to set up, in my opinion. Kind of think of that, you know, template aspect, especially if you're working with structural fasteners and you're not going to use Content Center. It's a great way to model one thing and, you know, put all the dimensional data in there instead of modeling all these individual parts. You know, think about if I make a change, then I've got to go and update every one of these instances where in the, you know, an iPart table, like, you know, all that data is in one location. And, you know, that's a great definition for an iPart, you know, multi-versions in one file. As I just indicated a few seconds ago, it's easier to manage, modify, those type of things. And I find it's very easy when I need to do a replacement in assembly and drawing view. So yes, granted, I could do component replacement, but with just a right mouse click, I can, you know, change it to another member inside that table. For me, you know, and other people, it's great. It's easier to locate those multiple versions of that information. You have the ability to visually see it and prove each configuration. Like I said, another advantage is that I can go into that custom aspect of it and simplify my design. Most time, iParts will lead to iAssemblies. So I have this mounting plate. In this assembly configuration, it's using this design, but in this assembly configuration, it's using this different mounting parts. When you're working with iParts, you know, think of that mounting plate. Well, you're probably going to have a manufacturing print. Well, you don't want to sit there and detail out every configuration. So what it allows you to do is, from the iPart factory, you can create a tabulated drawing. So it's taking the information from the iPart table and creating that table. I remember years ago doing board drafting, simple 2D drawings, you know, creating those tabulated drawings of a given part because it's all in this different configuration. It's just a nice way of doing that, and we'll demo that later on. Although it's not, you have to do it, but I think iParts is a great starting point for publishing new parts to your Content Center. So let's say you have this piping elbow. Well, you can put it all under the iPart table configuration and then publish all that information, and it's going to fill in the Content Center for you. What is disadvantage? Well, my first statement on the advantage was it's easy to set up, but it's also disadvantages is rules and conditions. Having that plan up front, understanding what it does, kind of leads, if you don't know that, or the rules and conditions, yeah, it's kind of a disadvantage. Some people don't like the linking back to the master file, so for, especially if you're working with Vault, that, a member still has a link to the iPart factory. So you could have 100 members inside this iPart table. Each one of those members is linked back to the master file. There's an extra folder structure that's being created, and I'm going to show you that later on when that gets when we generate a member. There is, and like I said, I keep referencing the advanced class, but you can learn how you can control that. But out of the box, it does certain things. Vault, if you're using Vault or even Windows Explorer and you're relocating the iPart factory of the members, all that doesn't work well. In advanced class, we're going to just walk you through some things, what you need to do if you need to relocate, and that's crucial with having that plan. Years ago, I had some iPart factories, and I put them in a folder. Same with members, and I'm like involved, and it ended up I didn't really like that structure. It's not easy always moving that. A disadvantage, like I said, that people struggle with is members are not updating when you make a change. Although threaded features are applied into the iPart table, I've seen instances where let's say you have 5 members in there that have thread functionality or the thread information in there. 2 of them, the inventor just struggles and says, I don't understand this thread function, but it's, or the data, but it's just all normal information. So I've seen cases where the thread features, it's not always 100% that it will generate the threads. Another disadvantage I consider, and it's based on a lot of the questions I see, especially out in the Autodesk forums, is not a live model. And it's like, well, what do you mean by a live model? For example, when you have all your member information inside of a table, if there's certain things that can only be obtained after the model is generated, will not go into an iPart table. So think about a part weight. Yes, you may be able to get the part weight of the active member in the iPart table, but you can't put that weight information inside the column because it's always going to be related to the active iPart member of the factory. Or think about sheet metals. Maybe you want to, put in your iPart table the blank length and width. You can't do that either because all that information comes about after the member is generated. So that's why I say it's not a live model. You can't pull information from members that haven't been generated and put it back into the table. There is a manual way to do that, and if you're want to learn more about that, we're not going to cover it in this class or the advanced. Just, drop us a line and we can point you to that information. As I indicated before, there's limitation, especially when it comes to complexity. I've seen some iPart tables that just go on and on and on. Start thinking about that. Do you really want to go that road? It's going to be a nightmare to manage. You may want to go an iLogic route. So when it comes to complexity, that limitation that's out there. Another disadvantage is Microsoft Excel is required. As you can see, there's the system requirements for 2017, and I know a lot of people are going to the cloud for Office and those type of things. Those things are not supported. So if you're in that type of environment where you don't have Excel installed on your machine, then it's iPart, iAssembly, those things are not going to work for you. And then last, another disadvantage is working with Vault. Not saying that if you have Vault, you can't use iPart. There's just some limitations out there things where you get placed, those type of things. There's some quirks with iParts and iAssemblies inside of Vault. All right, with that, let's switch over to Inventor. So basically what I've got here is my mounting plate. This configuration, the length, width, thickness, I'm going to, maybe I only have 2 mounting holes, 4 mounting holes, and those type of things. I'm going to start off showing you why it's important to have a plan in place, have all your information set and ready to go. So, like I said in the beginning, when we talk about advantages or the pros or the positive things about iParts, is the ability to, get it going. So if I go to the Manage Ribbon tab, and over here under the Author section is to create an iPart. When I do that, it brings up the iPart author table. And it basically, like I said, down here, kind of starts looking like a Excel spreadsheet. So for example, very simple, I know that D0 is maybe my length, D1 is my width, D2 is my thickness. So I'm going to go in here and I'm just going to click on one at a time and pick the information that I want to do. So I'm just picking up my dimensional parameters of my part. So as you can see, is as I put them in here, it's the order in which I selected. So keep in mind that there's no way, in some of the Inventor dialog boxes, I could pick a value and move it up or move it down. In the iPart author table, you can't do that. It's just the order in which you pick it in. I will show you in the advanced class how you can use Excel spreadsheet or Excel itself and reorder this information. So as you're doing this, you're looking to say, you know what? When I get this to somebody, they're not going to know D0, D1, and D2, what that means. So you're like, oh, I need to go and rename these to what they should be. So you go out of here and you hit OK. I will tell you, I have some, right now I have some issues with my Excel. I think our antivirus software is checking things, so there may be some delays here and there with Excel. So you go in here and you say, okay, this is my, let's just call this the width. So I'm coming in here and I'm changing the values of those dimensions. You're like, okay, good, ready to go, continue on my table. Now, because we've already created the iPart table, there is a new section in your browser called Table, and that contains the information. There is only one instance or one member that's in my table, so we're going to talk more about this information that shows. There's a couple ways that you can edit the table to go back in and make changes to it. I can right mouse click on here and say Edit Table. I can right mouse click here and say Edit Table, or I can just sit here and double click on the table in my browser and it's going to bring it up. Does anybody see what has happened? Now, in my extrusion information, height, thick, and width is there. But where is it in the table? One of the downsides of iParts is when you make changes to parameters, property names, and those type of things, the table does not update. And that's why I wanted to point this out. It's to have that plan and understand that it's important to have your model set up the way that you want. And granted, you're not going to, hit 100% in the beginning. You might go back and say, oh, I need to add these columns and those type of things. But try to get your model set up as, close to that 100% aspect of it. That way, when you add those parameters, they are all named. So in this case, what I would have to do is I have to go highlight them all just using normal Windows Control Shift method, right mouse click and say delete column, and then put them back in again. So just keep that in mind. It's recommended to set it all up with all the name parameters and all thing, and get it into the configuration that you want even before you get into creating the iPart table. All right, I'm going to hit cancel here. So basically, I just wanted to show that. So here's my actual part that we're going to be working with. It's got, a threaded hull. It's got some work feature or work planes and axes that I created. If I go into and look at my parameters, all the stuff is in there. Now, one of the things that I want to point out, even if you do misspell a parameter, you go back and change it, it's still not going to carry over. So even if I renamed it, misspelled it, put it into the table, and then realized I misspelled it, I'm going to have to recreate the column inside of the iPart table. So just keep those things in mind. Now, the other thing that's why it's important, in my opinion, to name your parameters before you start is that the iPart table will look at all the renamed parameters and put them into your iPart table automatically for you. The Inventor's kind of thinking ahead and says, okay, you rename this. I can kind of think these are crucial information, and it's going to put them in. So for example, like I said, I've got the width, the height, the thickness. I've got, the distance and the hole sizes for my mounting holes and those type of things. When I go over and click create an iPart, look what happens. It automatically puts that information into my model or my iPart table for me. So if you do the rename up front, like I said, having that plan, getting all that data read, it's going to help you in the end. But you might say, well, Mark, my thickness is always 0.25, but I just always wanted to make sure that that parameter name is thickness. That's fine. You can just go in here and right mouse click on and say delete the column. Now, when you're setting up an iPart table, a couple of things you want to consider. I always tell people, define all your columns. Like I said a few minutes ago, you may not know 100% all the columns in there, and that's fine. You're never going to hit that home run, the first time when you're doing setting up your iPart. But do all your columns first before you start adding your members. And the other thing is, if there's something in your part that doesn't change, for example, we just talked about thickness. If thickness is always constant among the members, or maybe the distance to locate your mounting holes, then don't include that information into your iPart table. Only apply the dimensional information or properties that is changing among the among the different configurations. So let's start talking about the tabs at the top. So the parameters, like I said, is all the information that is the dimensional values to create the extrusion, the hole, and those type of things. If I go to properties, it's all the iProperties. So I could put in, say, well, the subject line is always changing, the title, those type of thing, the project information. So I can apply all that information. Suppression is, here's my features that are inside my model. What do I want to suppress? So for example, let's say in my configuration, maybe hole 2 and hole 4 are going to be suppressed. Now what a lot of times people will do is they will go and set the distances to 0. Do not do that. You will cause corruption and those type of things. Use the actual suppression tab to suppress the components that you want. So for example, I'm going to suppress hole 2 and hole 4. When I go to eye features, if we had any eye features in this part, I could add those, control those. If I was working with iMate, same thing, I can add that information. Work features. When, like I said in the beginning, work features are the ones that you do may not will not carry over into the generated members of the iPart factory. So for example here, if I move my dialog, and I want to point out a couple things, I created just an axis going through this hole and an axis going through this hole, and then I generated a work plane through those two axes. Now I may require this work plane in all my members. Maybe I'm doing some special constraint in my assembly. So the question is, do I have to include the two axes as well? No, you don't. So when it comes to work features, you only need to include the ones that are needed. It still knows, and they say, well, wait a minute, wouldn't that work feature fail because those axes are not there? Technically, those axes are not in that member, but because all the relationship is back to the factory, it knows how that work feature was created. So I'm just going to click on my work plane here. And the other thing is what I want to point out, if I move this iPart author so I can see my model, it will, especially if you have a lot of work feature, like, I don't remember what work plane was. If you click on it, it represents the information out onto the screen. So that's a nice little feature. So I'm going to hit, yep, I'm going to include work plane 1. Then when I go to my threads, I can add all this information. Now, if you are changing threads, information, try to include as much information as possible. Like I said, one of the disadvantages, I've seen some odd behavior with the threads in iParts where it just, even though the information is correct, it does not want to generate the information. And then the last one is called Other. Now, I've used Other a lot when I'm authoring tube and pipe components for the Content Center, but one of the functions that is not there is the appearance aspect of the model. So what I'm going to do is click here to add, and I'm going to add a column called color or appearance, whatever you want to do. In the iPart table, you have the ability, because in the properties, I'm going to show you that, so I'm just going to hit OK. And if we scroll over to the end, the color is there. If I go to the iProperties aspect of it, and I go to physical, I have the ability to add the material here. So I'm just going to go and add material as well. So as you can see here. Now, in the material aspect of it, it puts that this column is designated as material. So you got that same image icon representing in the column as you do up here in your quick access toolbar. If I right mouse click on that material, it's defined as a material column. The other key component here, and I've seen this, and I've gotten questions about it, or I've seen it on this forum, when I go to generate this member, I get this really long file name. And the main reason is you don't have a column designated in your model, or in your iPart table, excuse me, as member. So in this case here, by default, it's automatically selected. Sometimes, I don't know if somebody unselected it, got rid of the member column, or those type of things. But make sure you always have the member name column, or whatever you're calling the file name, with this floppy disk image. And if you right mouse click on it, it tells you that's the file name column. If there is no file name column defining the iPart, you will get this very long member name, which you want to avoid at all costs. So I started out, we talked about color. Well, there is no definition in here that I can pick from parameters properties what I want my appearance is. So you use the other table and give it a column called color. When you come in here, you right mouse click on it and say, this is my appearance column. For material and color, those names have to match exactly what's in the, your defined material and color or appearance information. If I go in here and call it blue, it's going to give me a message saying that I cannot find a blue appearance. In our case here, it would actually be blue wall paint glossy. It is case sensitive, so you have to, like I said, character by character, what's defined in the material definition and what's defined in the appearance aspect of it. Okay? All right, so now we have our table all defined, what I'm going to use here. At this point here, I'm going to right mouse click on it and say, now I'm going to insert a row. The insert row is always, or the row that's getting inserted is always below the one that you selected on. All right, so if I go here and right mouse click on it and say insert row, the naming, the member gets in between the original and the second one I added. So just keep about where you're right mouse clicking and adding that. When you're defining, and this is one of the things I should have really pointed out before we started, generating members, but I'm not going to change it at this point. If I go to the option aspect of it, this is where the automatic member name or automatic part numbering come in. So you can, set it to a certain value, the separation and all those type of things. So you can define what the part number and member name is going to be every time you put it in. But that doesn't mean that you're restricted to that. Anytime, it's just like an Excel spreadsheet, I could come in here and say, well, this member name is really this. So I can control that information. Or I can have it automatically assign ahead. When you get to your including or suppressing things, so like work planes, it's include or exclude. When you get to suppression of components, and this is odd, it's compute or suppress. So if I go in here, just a message saying that, hey, you modified the member name different than what you have defined. That's fine. It just wants to make sure that you're doing that or you understand what you're doing. So it's compute or suppress. All right. Two other ways that you can, or a couple other ways you can do it. You can just do C, S, or you can do 0 for suppress and 1 for compute. So those are the three ways that you can do it. Now, for example, what I want to show you, I'm going to just change this to F, which doesn't mean anything, and I'm going to go over here and change this to, 6 point, or let's just put some text in here. Now, when I click on it, it's going to show you that these are invalid cells. That's what the yellow, and you're going to learn about in the advanced class of U10, the different color code configuration. But what you also can do, and I wish this verify button would do more, like when I first learned about iParts and I said verify, oh, that must be, it's going to go through and verify all my members and make sure that everything works. And that's not the case. The verify is only checking the information that's in the table. So for example, I've already got this. If I change this back to compute, it's going to change, but what the verify does is it just goes and just confirms that what you're putting in the cells is correct. So if I go in here and say, let's just do suppress, it's probably going to change to the yellow. It's kind of thinking ahead, but the verify is doing the same thing. If you just want to go double check all your cells to make sure, and anything that turns yellow will be, there's something wrong with it. All right, so let's just go back to making these all compute. Oops. All right. And we'll just change this back to the 1.5. All right. Now, the other thing that's crucial about an iPart table is setting up key columns that I talked about. You may not have any key columns, then that's fine. But basically, you go to any column and right mouse click on it and say, this is my first key. So what happens is when that occurs, that will be the first question asked. All right, what is going to be the width? So if I put that there, if I go to height, I'll say that's the second question. And if I go to do the thickness, that will be the third question. So it's going to prompt you, and it looks at all this and says, okay, what is the width, what is the height, and what is the thickness? Basically, that's to set up an iPart table. You have to get in and practice and work with it. To me, it's simple to set up, but without knowing those kind of rules and conditions up front, you may run into some issue, and that's why I said it's important to have that plan up front. So with that, we're going to hit OK. Like I said, I've got some Excel issues so that there is some things that are going on because I have that threaded file out there. It's going out and checking all the threaded information regarding that. So there is a little delay. This is not something that's normal. And I do apologize for that. Another thing that I just want to point out while we're waiting here, that when we're talking about the iPart, I try to tell people to keep things uniform. If you're working with inches, try to keep all your dimensional data in inches. To me, it just makes things much easier, especially when you get into authoring tube and pipe components. from an iPart table. If things are in different units, it just causes issues down the road. And if you're putting in the unit and measure like inches like I have there, try to do that across the board. If you're working in two-place decimals, then try to make sure everything is in two-place decimals. It just, to me, it makes it easier, and it's easier to read the iPart table aspect of it. And I do, like I said, I do apologize for this delay in the, this is not normal, but it happened to me this morning, and I didn't have enough time to correct the issue before the webinar. So what we're going to do is once this comes back, we're going to expand, show the table that's out there, and then we're going to start generating the members from that. All right. Like I said, sorry about that. And as you can see, the member, that member has changed because it's, I had some changes into it, and you see that it suppressed the whole, it's changed my appearance to that blue paint. If I expand my table, here's the information. I have different things here. So I've added, key columns. So if I right mouse click on here, I can toggle back to list by member name. So these are the members that are there. Or if I right mouse click, I can say list by key. So it's breaking down. So as I go through, the check mark indicates this is the active member that it's showing. I can go in here and pick every one of these and say right mouse click and say activate or double click on it. So that's how I can toggle and go through each member. So I can say activate. It's going to go through and create the member associated to that. So in this case here, because all the color or the appearance is the same, that information. So in that case, the whole came back. All right. Now keep in mind that you say, well, wait a minute. You told me that you're only including the work feature of that work plane, and I did. But in this case, you're kind of still looking at the iPart factory. So all the information is going to be there in regards to the work features. So let's talk about creating a member. So any one of these members, no matter where I am, I'm going to right mouse click on here and generate and select generate file. This is, like I said, I can do it individually or all inside my iPart factory, or when I go to a drawing or assembly and I'm placing that in, it's going to generate that information for me if it's not already up there. Just going to come back and say, yep, you're creating a member. Let's do it. It goes out and generates. Now, depending on how the complexity of your member is or your iPart table, you may see down in the right-hand corner that's doing its work. Other times it's really quick. I've got a simple part here. One of the things that I wanted to point out is out of the box, this is what happens. Here's my plate is located, this mounting plate that I'm working on is located in my documents, Inventor iParts. When I go to generate a member, it creates a subfolder named the same thing as your iPart. So if you've got this very long named iPart factory, you're going to create a duplicate folder name as that. And when I first started, when I got in the vault, I'm like, what is this big huge folder that I created? I don't remember creating that. It's just because that's what the iPart is doing. So if I go into this subfolder, here is that member that I just generated. You're going to learn in the advanced class of View 10 how you can control that information. All right. But I just wanted to point that out. Now, when I go to my model, I'm going to place this in. So I'm going to save my iPart factory, and I'm going to start a new assembly. So I'm going to go and say place, and I'm going to pick my factory. There's a couple ways that you can do it. You can either pick the factory and then define, grab the member information, or I can go into where the member is and I can actually insert the member. The end result is the same, but if you already have that member out there, you don't have to go through the steps and say, this is what I want, and it says if the member is generated, skip it, if not, create it. So there's, either way, the end results, you're going to get the same inside. So we're going to go just pick this, and what it does is it comes up and says, okay, here is your information. So when I click on here, because in my example here, all my information is the same. I didn't really change any dimensional values, but we could, is when I click on it, I can pick the information that's inside my table. For this case here, I'm just going to pick this. I'm going to go over, and I can do the same thing with the tree aspect, or I can even go to my table and click on it. So for example here, I'm going to click on this plate 3B, and I'm going to hit OK. So it's put that member into my assembly. If I go back to that same folder under my iParts plate mounting, I didn't go from the factory and generated the member. I went to the model, I created an assembly and inserted that iPart member, and what it does is it goes out and generates it. So just wanted to point that out. Same thing if I go to my drawing, if I start a new drawing, and I start a base view, I can either pick the member or I can pick the factory, and I'm going to just pick the factory. So we're going to pick the plate mounting part again, hit OK. If I go to the model states, I now have the ability to change the plate and pick the one you want. So I'm going to pick this plate mounting 2 because we haven't done that yet. I created that. If I go back to my folder, as you can see that the member is generated. If I go back to my assembly where my iPart is, if I right mouse click on the table and say change component, I can do the same thing. I'm bringing it back up, and that's why I said it's just a much easier. It's not this, component replacement workflow. I just click on the table, come in here and say, okay, this should be plate mounting 2 here. Nothing is really changing in this aspect of it because the my data inside of my iPart table is all the same for all the members. Same thing if I go to my drawing, go to right mouse click on my view and say edit view. I go to my model state and says, okay, this one should be the factory. Now, one of the things that I tell people that if you don't have this already set up in your drawing template, if you go to Tools, Document Settings, if you're working with iParts, I recommend that you have this option checked under the Document Settings Drawing tab is Preserve Orphan Annotation. Sometimes when you're toggling from members, just because how things, what you're showing, sometimes you lose the annotations. So if you preserve orphan annotations option inside your template, although the dimension may be not connecting to something, at least it's in purple and it's maintaining your drawing, and very simple, you can just reconnect it and reestablish the link. So if you're working with a lot of iParts, I recommend setting that as your option inside of your template. Okay? Now, let's create a drawing to create a tabulated drawing. So we're going to go back to my model here. We're going to go back to the factory. And you must do this on the factory because that's where the table is. So I'm just going to orient my iPart factory in the way I wanted to do it. And I'm going to do and say create drawing view. The other key component to this, in order to do a tabulated drawing, you must at least have one member generated, because you'll get a message that it's not up, it's out of date, and there's no member generated. So in our case here, we've all done different workflows to get the members generated. So we're going to say create drawing view, and we're just going to pick my standard template. And we're going to go through and pick each of them, the base views that we want. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to the annotation tab and pick general. If I select any of these views because it's associated to the iPart factory, when I click on it, it's going to come and says, okay, here's the key columns that you have select. So I'm assuming that's the information that you want to appear in the table. Yes or no? You make that decision. But I can come in here into the column chooser and pick any other column information, whether it's a key column or not, and put it in there. So I could actually add color and those type of things. So now when I hit OK, however my table's set up, hit OK here, and now I bring up my table, and there's the information. So I created that tabulated drawing within a matter of seconds. And if I go in and change the iPart table in the factory, then the information appears there as well. I know I've thrown a lot of stuff at you for iParts, but at least this gets you started. And because we have a few minutes left, what I want to do is just talk quickly about members not updating, and then we'll turn it over for questions, a Q&A session. A lot of times when we're working with an iPart and we go in right mouse click or however we want to do and say edit table, for example, I may have in my properties, I may have this, subject line in there, and I go and say, oh, for member 2, it should have been this name, so people will, they'll change it. But in the bill of materials for that member 2, it's still showing the incorrect information. So people go, okay, I'm going to go in here and I'm going to, right mouse click and say generate members. However, if a member is generated already, so it's in that folder structure, you have it loaded in assembly, you have it loaded into the drawing, because that information is in memory, sometimes the members do not update. So people will close out everything in memory and try to do a generate, and it still doesn't work. What I find, and like I said, it's not a user-friendly workflow, but I've never had a problem with it. And what I tell people who struggle with that members not updating is basically close out everything in Inventor. Your iPart factory, any members, any assembly that has the factory or the members in, or any drawings. And what you do is you go to these files of your members that got generated in that folder, select the ones that are not updating, and just delete them. So for example here, if I right mouse click on here and say, delete just normal Windows operation, then go back into, open up your factory and regenerate the members again. Now you may get some messages that, oh wait a minute, things have changed, and that's fine. But like I said, I've never had this issue of members not updating when using that workflow. Yeah, it's a little clunky, but I don't even fight around. If I make changes to my iPart table, there's certain things like dimensional values, they will automatically update, but when you get into properties, color, appearances, and those type of things, they may not update. So anything that I update in the iPart table, I just go and out to Windows Explorer, close everything out in Inventor, and I just delete it. And one last thing I just wanted to point out, if I go and open up a member, so if I go and directly open up a member, so we're going to go to this subfolder that's create, and I'm going to click on that plate mounting one. All right. Granted, there's an update that needs to be done. But if I go in here and say, well, wait a minute, why can't I get to my properties? Why is everything grayed out? Why can't I do that? And that's one of those things with an iPart standard member, is that it's under the control of the mounting plate factory that's generated. So all that information is linked back there. And as you can see, that that's the link that it's established. And some people don't like that, and that's why I consider that as a disadvantage. All right, we got a few minutes left. I will turn it over. Anybody has a question, you can either type in the pane, or if you want to ask it, we can unmute you and we'll go from there. Yeah, so a question came in and says, well, if you delete those members and regenerate it, will it remember everything? Yes, it does. I mean, technically, you're just regenerating the same information again that's there. So you haven't lost anything. You may get, I've seen some messages come up that says, something has changed here, but I've never had any, issues with, constraints or it can't find the file, those type of things. As long as it's being generated in that same, original location, you should be fine. Yeah, so there's another question came in and said that the asking if this webinar will be available later on. Yes, it will be, and we'll provide you that link. There's a question here. I'm not sure I understand. You delete the part that's not. I'm not sure what you mean by deleting a part that's not in the factory. Good, sir. You want your line unmuted and you can ask. Alan?
I just unmuted him.
Christopher, can you clarify what you mean?
Oh, wait.
If you delete the part that's not in the factory, is there a way to fix it? Another question came up, and then, like I said, we'll talk more about custom custom iParts. A quick question is, if you always have to enter the information. Well, the custom parameter is kind of like an open value, so every time you place that member into, or place the iPart factory into the assembly or drawing, it's going to prompt you what is that value. So technically, yes, you would have to enter that each and every time because it's a custom value. There's no set parameter for it. There will be no discussions for in this session or in the advanced class in regards to factory assets. And I guess that's the question: is you're talking about iPart, factories and factory design with Vault. We will not be covering that. But if you do have questions, you can ping us and we can go from there. Yeah, so there was a question raised. If we go over to here, and I'm assuming that asking the question, why is there a factory member button under the author section? So you see this factory or member. That's one of the topics that we're going to talk about in the advanced section. When you get into certain things like with sheet metal and everything, because the factory is controlling all the data, when you get into sheet metal aspect, the edit member scope is allowing you to apply sheet metal rules and functionalities of sheet metal to those individual members that are inside of your iPart table. So it's a toggle. Are you editing the factory scope, which we have been doing, or are you editing the individual members? Oh, okay. So I think I understand. So if you generate a file and then delete the factory, is there a way to fix that? Fix the broken link. And I don't know. I've never tried that. If I deleted a member, what's going to happen, but I think it's going to complain about not finding the factory anymore. So be careful about, deleting factories that you have members already generated from that. So just watch that. Yes, and another question came in about, the custom column aspect of it. Yes, we're going to talk about that in the advanced class. But just to answer your question, if I go in and edit a table, if I right mouse click on any table, I can create a custom parameter column, and then I can go in and set the ranges and the increment for that information. So that's basically how you set up the difference between a normal static iPart column or a custom parameter column. So a question came in about they have a tabulated drawing, and they were asking a question about large tables. When you bring in that table aspect of it in that drawing, when you create that table, if I go general and I pick on that information, like I said, it defaults to looking at the key columns, but you can go in and say column chooser, and you can pick any column information that you have defined in your iPart table. So it's whatever you want to be, but by default, it's always picking the key columns that you have designated out there. And just to add to that, large tables, I haven't really tried. Usually the tables that I've always done from here, I might have 5 or 6 columns. If you have more columns than that, I guess I would have to test it and see what the impact. I guess I'm assuming that it all comes in, but it would just be a very large table. Right. So if you delete or re-add the columns, the information, especially if you have a table that you start out, you forgot to put, like I said, that plan ahead, didn't rename the parameters, you deleted them, put new stuff in. The question is, do I have to regenerate the members? Yes, you will, because there is some bad information linking across there. So anytime that you are deleting or adding columns to your iPart table, the best thing to do is go and regenerate all the members that you need out there. And if you delete a row and put it back in, yes, you have to, same thing, you have to generate. So any deleting, adding of columns, rows, you have to regenerate the members. It's the best thing for you to do to make sure that everything gets resolved. If you delete it and put it back in, there may be some issues where it says, well, it's kind of the same, you named it all the same way, but I'm just not seeing the link between them. So a question came up is, how do I import Excel tables, rows to generate the parts? The big thing here is that you have to start out with an iPart table, and you have to set it up the way that you want. Then you can go and do a couple things. You can edit with Excel or edit the spreadsheet using Excel, and then you can do copy and paste, but all the ordering has to be the same. There is certain hidden things in those column headers that the iPart table is creating that you may not see inside your Excel. So if you've already got an Excel table, you got to put it in the same order as your iPart table, and then you can copy and paste between them. But there is no manual way of importing them in. Any other questions? A lot of great questions today. Like I said, if you don't, we're a little bit over time, but that's fine. If you got other questions, that's what we're here for. So if you don't want to type it in, we can unmute you and go from there. Yeah, so there was a question come in and said that I did something, now I had changed something, and now I'm fighting with Vault. And that's one of the things that, especially if you're working with Vault, it's not always an easy thing in regards to iParts or iAssembly. So you just have to work through those. There's not a one stapled easy button solution for what you're doing. All right, I'll just give a couple more minutes here if anybody else has any questions. Okay, I'm not seeing any new questions coming in. Like I said, if you any questions about this, about iParts, you can ping us, or like I said, the webinar will be out there at some point, and we'll share that link with you so you can use it for future, or share it with others that were unable to attend. With that, have a great day and the rest of the week.